Hello guys, and welcome to an episode of Sitting with Sana. I'm your girl Sana Latrice, and I am so excited to be here with you guys on today. So this is really our first episode. I did an introduction a few weeks back, but this is our official first episode, and I felt like I could not really start this series off without actually introducing myself to y'all. So there are quite a few of you who already know me. You've kind of followed me on this life journey through the years. But what I've realized is I have some people who really don't know me. Maybe you just came across one of my posts on social media and was like, oh, she kind of dope. Let me follow her. But I wanted to be able to really let you know who I am so that as we journey together through this series, you understand more about me and my experiences and some of the crazy things that I may say. So let's start from the beginning. I'm going to tell you the story of my life as I now know it. It's not a story that I've always known. It's one that I've had to kind of discover along the years of my life. So my story really began 42 years ago, right? Well, we'll go back maybe 40 years ago. So when I was first born, I was born into a family that I guess you would call dysfunctional. There was a lot of dysfunction within the family. My mother was unfortunately addicted to drugs, and she had been in and out of prison for most of her life as I know it. And my father was also kind of involved in drugs and had some time that he did in prison. I guess you would call both of them maybe like black sheeps of the family, but very loving people, just black sheeps of the family. They got involved into that fast life in the streets and they just got caught up. My father was actually my mother's dealer. That's how they met. And so I don't know if they actually dated or if it was a one-night stand or what the case may be, because my mother was like beautiful. Okay, I'm just gonna put it out there. My mother was beautiful. You know, she was this thick chick, so she had the dudes on lock. Anyway, she got pregnant. And she didn't just get pregnant with one child. She got pregnant with twins. I have a twin brother. And so she got pregnant, and she knew that bringing us into this world really was not the best option for her. My grandmother was also into drugs. My uncle was into drugs. A lot of my family, that's just kind of, you know, their lifestyle on the maternal side of my mom's family. And so she knew that really wasn't the life that she wanted for her children. Not to mention, my grandmother had trafficked my mother when my mother was a child. And so she knew that my grandmother would probably try to do the same thing to her child. And so having kids was just really not an option. And so she told my father that she was going to have an abortion. And my father believed that. And he went on with his life. Unfortunately, he ended up going back to North Carolina, where he's from. He got arrested and was put into prison. And my mother did not have the abortion. My grandmother actually convinced her to carry my brother and I. And so she did. And she birthed twins, Sana and Tyson. I'm twin A, as I was known, 2 minutes older than my brother. And while those 2 minutes seem extremely small, for me growing up, those 2 minutes felt like an eternity. It felt like 2 generations. And so that's why I came into this world with a brother that I absolutely loved and adored, still love and adore. He's alive, very much alive, and he's my younger brother. My mother, though, unfortunately fell on some hard times, and again, she was an addict. She had a disease, and she struggled with drug addiction for most of her life, in and out of prison, and having us did not stop that path. Unfortunately, she continued down that road. And one day, my uncle, my mother's brother, her only sibling on her mother's side, took us to a doctor's appointment, him and his girlfriend at the time. And he took us to a regular doctor's appointment because DCF was already involved from birth. And so my uncle was the one that kind of was responsible for taking us to these doctor's appointments, because although he was also struggling with a drug addiction. His addiction wasn't as bad. I guess that's the best way to put it. So he was the designated person to bring us to those type of appointments to try to keep DCF off of their back. And so he took us to his appointment one day, and the doctor went ahead and performed my brother's exam. Everything went fine. And then they went to do my exam, and that's when things got a little bad. So when they went to do my exam, I began to cry. I began to scream. I did not want the doctor to continue. And so he had the nurse kind of finish the exam with me while he stepped out the room. And I told the nurse at that time that I had been being touched by men in the house. After running some tests in the hospital, it turned out that I had a sexually transmitted disease, and then further investigation down the road showed that I had been being sex trafficked. Thankfully, did not experience that because my uncle was able to move him in with him and his girlfriend because my uncle knew what was going on. He knew that it had happened to my mother. He knew it was going to happen to me. And he wanted to take both of us, but unfortunately, my grandmother wouldn't allow him. And so he was only able to take my brother, and I remained in the home with my grandmother and my mother, and I was trafficked. So, of course, the police were called, child welfare was called, and that's how we ended up in the foster care system at 4 years old. So that night, being placed in foster care, when we finally were placed there, because we were in the hospital for a few days, and then they eventually placed us into care. And I remember going to my foster family's home in Bridgeport, Connecticut on East Street. I know the address, but I ain't gonna give it to y'all because I don't want y'all driving by them people's house. But we lived on 6th Street. It was 6th Street, I'm sorry. We lived on 6th Street in Bridgeport, the east end of Bridgeport, and we pulled up to this home, and I remember when I was that small, it looked like a mansion. Like, the house looked so big, but it was also so dark. And so we walked up the steps with our social worker, and our foster mother opened the door, and I just remember it just feeling so dark. Like, there was no warmth to that house. The house wasn't lit up, and I don't think it wasn't lit up just because it was nighttime and everyone was kind of preparing to go to bed. As I realized throughout my years there, it just was that type of a home. It was just a dark home. It was a cold home. It was an eerie home. It just was not loving and warmth and the home that you would want to walk into when you were being removed from the only people that you've ever known. And so we walked into this house. We were greeted by our foster mother. And in that moment, I remember my brother literally just stopped talking. Like, he would not talk to anyone from that point forward. Anytime he needed to say something, he would whisper it in my ear, and I became his mouthpiece. What I have learned through that situation, from me telling the doctor that, I had been being abused, to my brother talking to me and me becoming his mouthpiece, was the power of my voice. The power of storytelling. I can honestly say that storytelling began for me in that moment, and it's never stopped. It's been the absolute single thing that has really saved my life. God used my voice to tell the story of what was happening, which is how we were placed into care, and that abuse was able to end there. So anyway, we're in this home, and we're not the only kids in this home. There's other kids that live there that one was about our age, and everyone else was a little older than us. Some were adopted. And throughout the years, there would be kids kind of in and out of that home. They were not a family that was new to foster care. It's something that they had been doing for years and years. So they had a lot of experience in foster care. And for the most part, the home was very strict. They were a pastor and a first lady. They were just starting church, having a church in their home. It was actually in the basement. So I remember Sundays we would wake up and get dressed, and we would go right to the basement, and we would have church there. And that was my introduction to Christ, was church in the basement of our home. Eventually, they grew out of that home, and they got a building in Bridgeport, and that's where they had church. But that was really my first introduction, and through my time with that family, I got to know the inner workings of church, but I also got to see the unhealthy side of marriage and ministry. It wasn't too long after we started living there that the pastor and the first lady went for a divorce. There was some infidelity that happened in the marriage, and I just remember like a huge argument happening one day, and he left and he never came back. And it wasn't too long after that then that she had a stroke, I believe it was, and there was a lot of medical issues, and it was determined at that point that she would not be able to continue fostering us. And furthermore, she would not be able to adopt us, which we thought was always the plan, that we were going to get adopted. I thought this was going to be my forever home. We were there for almost 5 years, and all of a sudden it was over. And it was over in the strangest way, y'all. And I'll share that on another episode of Sitting with Sana. But that's really how it started for me. I want to say that my story is one of pain. It's one of struggle. It's one of suffering. But as I share more of my story, you're going to see the way God's hand was always strategically in and out, putting all the pieces together to kind of get me to the place that I am now. I'm excited about being able to do Sitting with Sana with you guys because I want to be able to share some of the more vulnerable parts of my story and my honest feelings as I've matured and grown through the years, and I get to kind of see things a little differently than I probably even seen it 5 years ago. And I want to be able to have different conversations with you guys. I mentioned that part about unhealthy ministry and marriage, seeing that firsthand, like that being my first view of what marriage is. Because prior to that, my mother definitely, my birth mother was not married at all. She had been married, but I didn't know who he was. That was before we were born. And so I never saw like marriage or a husband and a wife or a mother and a father in the same home. Like that was new to me. And then to introduce this idea of Christ in a marriage and to see it go completely awry, it really affected me more than I even care to realize now. And so I want to be able to even take you on some of the ins and outs of my own marriage, some of the marriages that I've seen throughout my life, and how they've kind of shaped my narrative and my thoughts on how I operate in my marriage today and why marriage is such a big thing for me. That's another story. We'll talk about it another time. But I really just wanted to share with you guys just the beginning of my story. I'm going to share more as we go because, like I said, I ended up getting adopted. So at 8.5, I ended up on the whole opposite side of the state of Connecticut with a brand new family and a new path in this journey of life. And y'all, it was a doozy. There's a lot that happened to me from 8.5 to 16, and then a lot that happened from 16 to 21. But I want to be able to share a lot of those things with you guys. I don't think people really understand my story. They know a little bit, but y'all, it was deep. It is deep. And so we're going to get into that. So I'm excited to take you guys along this journey. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments because I want to hear from y'all. I'm going to respond to your comments because I really want to engage and I want us to be a community. And I may even answer some of those questions on the next episode live. So thank you for joining me for the first episode of Sitting with Sana. This is just a little bit of what we're going to be talking about. But y'all, we're going to be talking about all things, okay? Marriage, all types of stuff. Because I think it's important. I think that it's important for somebody to speak up and be real and honest about just life in general and this walk that we're walking together as Christians. And so I hope that you guys will join me for another episode of Sitting with Sana. See you soon.